I would like to introduce to you Francesco Benedetti. It's our honorary consul of Chechen Republic of Ickeria in Italy. Hello, Francesco.
Good evening.
Good
evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. Recent events in Syria gave us a cue to look back over the 30 years since the first Russian invasion of the Chechen Republic of Ickeria. A few days ago, Bashar al-Assad fled the country and took refuge in Moscow under the protection of Vladimir Putin. These two men have a few things in common. First of all, they come to power almost simultaneously, Putin in May 2000, Assad in July of the same year. Both then maintained it in the cult of their personality, propped up by security service violence and disinformation. Both, finally, defended it by militarizing society and mobilizing it against an external enemy, with the sole purpose of protecting the autocracy. Who knows if the fate that put them on the stage together and finds them together again today did not foresee the same exit from the stage for both of them. As well as the Syrian one, the Russian autocracy is also resisting collapse and has been doing so since the early 90s. The first Russian-Chechen War was the first expedient by which the Kremlin attempted to defend its empire from disintegration. Faced with the defeat it suffered at the hands of the Chechen armed forces, the Russian state had the opportunity to rethink itself as a modern state, but then imperialist forces prevailed, albeit disguised as liberal or democratic forces. Those same forces prepared for the arrival of a new type of autocrat, capable of bringing together under his figure oligarchs, security service, army, and media, turning private initiative into an empty shell and state structures into an apparatus of mere executors of his will. As a result of this, the Russian state has developed as a war machine, a war that only a permanent state of conflict will allow autocracy to preserve itself. Putin has made every social, economic, and political component imbued by an imperialist mentality. This is easily verifiable if it is true that even the most open-minded of Russia's so-called liberals oppose any redefinition of the concept of Russia, taking into consideration the plurality of nations living there and increasingly clamoring for the right to decide their future independently. It is precisely in this sense that the first Russian-Chechen War takes on a most important historical and political significance. If the Russians would agree to discuss this event as a tragic misdirection, they could begin their institutional and cultural disarmament, to which they have been subjected for 30 years now, and resume their journey from the colonial empire they are now toward a modern state embedded in relationship of respect and equality toward all other nations. In this sense, the increasingly difficult military situation on the Ukrainian front could lead to a collapse of Putin autocracy. If this came to pass, defeat on the ground and the subsequent demilitarization of the Russian state could be followed by a de-imperialization of Russian culture. And this dismantling of Moscow imperial culture could only start with two events. On December 11, 1994, the outbreak of the First Russian-Chechen War, and on August 6, 1996, when Grozny was liberated from the invader and Chechnya regained its freedom. What happened in the period between these two dates was the most destructive invasion war unleashed on European soil since 1945, which produced such high civilian casualties that it generated a veritable genocide. A disaster from Chechens, of course, who saw their cities razed to the ground and their sons fallen in the defense of their homeland, and their families mowed down. But a disaster for Russian society as well, which experienced that defeat as a national trauma. Instead of taking note of how anachronistic it was to refound the grotesque third edition of Tsarism, Russians preferred to give in to the blandishment of the likes of Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who in January 1994 declared, "Russia doesn't need to be loved. Russia needs to terrify. The world must be afraid of us." Statements of this kind infected public opinion in the Federation, convincing it that merely recognizing the right of nations like Chechnya to independence would lead to the end of theirs. To quote Italian analyst Dario Fabbri, "Russians have always had a serious psychological insecurity. Second main characteristic of Russian psychology is the oversized idea of self. They feel they are a people who always deserve to be a superpower, to be empire, to impose themselves to others. So they are afraid of others, and at the same time, they feel they deserve to dominate others, which often makes them tremendously aggressive. This aggressiveness, cultivated over the years and passed down from father to sons since that fateful December 11, 1994, has dragged Russia one step closer to defeat. If this happens, perhaps we can commemorate the next anniversary of the First Russian-Chechen War directly in Grozny, or as the Chechen may return to calling it, Johar. Thank you for your attention and have a good time.
Thank you very much, dear Francesco.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much.
Thank you.